What's up, guys? It's your girl, Legal Beast. It's been a day, a long day, as I'm still ambulating around with this boot on my foot, scheduled for x-rays, etc., etc. I did finish the Crumbley trial and the openings and the closings, and yeah, I know I'm a little bit behind. Right now we're on verdict watch, but again, life be lifing, and I'm a practicing attorney, so it is what it is. Now, I'll start with, to me, trial ended, I felt like the rest of the trial was just a normal trial. Like, there wasn't, in my opinion, it wasn't anything in particular that stood out to me, at all. There were obviously, in my opinion, there were definitely a lot of photos that were not shown in this trial that were shown in the first trial. There, obviously evidence from the other trial that didn't technically make it into this trial, but all of the key pieces made it in. The initial interview, the counselor, the journal, all of those key pieces made it in. Now, when we get to the prosecution's closing, I thought it was very long, but it was not unnecessarily long per se, because when you think about the number of days of trial, the number of witnesses, the amount of evidence that was presented, I would anticipate, I think a 20-minute closing is reasonable considering. When it started, it kind of threw me off a little bit, because it just kind of seemed like she just started talking, and then I think it got into more of a groove later on near the end, where she started really getting into the facts of the case. And in my opinion, a lot of the times for the prosecution, the rebuttal, to me, sometimes, has definitely been the strongest to me in both of these trials, because I felt like the rebuttals were succinct, clear responses to why certain things were admitted and why certain things were not. And I also thought they were clear. It was clear and succinct as to what needed to be proven, and in getting rid of the deflections. What was attempted, I think, by the defense. That's my opinion. I think that the overall closing, though, and again, I know this is days of evidence that they have to get into in some type of order for presentation. And I think that the order of the presentation could have been better. I think that the order of presentation wasn't succinct enough, in my opinion. There were certain parts that I thought really drove home certain pieces, and that, they don't have to prove what he knew, but focusing on the fact that there's two different prongs for this involuntary manslaughter that that the evidence has to meet in order for a guilty. So even if they don't believe one prong fits, but believe another prong fits, they can still find a guilty verdict under those separate prongs. And with that being said, I think that was made clear to the jury that, okay, maybe this set of facts doesn't show this to you, but it shows this. And to me, even if everyone on the jury felt like it fits a separate element, but still satisfy all required elements for voluntary manslaughter, it could still render a guilty verdict. And then when we got to the closing, I understand where, well, first of all, I think that defense counsel did a great job with closing. I think she did the best with everything that she had. I think she was great in showing, the lack of knowledge, again, even though that isn't what had to be proven. But I think she did as much of a good job as she could in trying to deflect from certain things. But I think it got very repetitive at the end. And sometimes when you can get really repetitive with a jury, you can lose them and you can lose their focus. Because if you say something new after you've stated the same thing multiple times, then they may shut down to what you say after that, even if you're stating something new. If you're stating bringing to light a different fact, you could lose your jury by being repetitive. And I think that the way her closing went on repeat on some of these things could run a risk of that. Also, I think that from looking at the way the closing was presented by the defense, I think she did a good job in separating out what evidence was not applicable to James Crumbley in this case. And I think she did a good job in trying to show that you can't be neglectful if you don't have all the facts. And I think that's kind of where she was going with her defense, is that he didn't have knowledge of this, he didn't have knowledge of this, he didn't have knowledge of that. But how can he be neglectful if he doesn't have all the facts? Now, that could be hurtful, because on the flip side, a jury could say, well, he didn't have all the facts because he was neglectful. You can say that he wasn't aware of how his son was feeling because he was neglectful, because he didn't pay attention to him, because he was not present for him, because he was not there for him. And I think it's kind of like a catch-22 in that argument. But I think she did as good of a job as she could with the evidence that she was presented with. Quite honestly, I think that both closings summed up a significant amount of discovery, of evidence and testimony and pictures and summations, and as succinctly as they could, with some repetitiveness on both, but as succinctly as they could. I do wish that there was a little bit more demonstrative evidence on the defense side. And what I mean by demonstrative evidence, I mean, evidence that can demonstrate how he was not neglectful, even if it's just a freaking pie chart of, the average working parent and the amount of time that they have to spend with their child based upon the amount of hours that they spend in school, and the amount of hours that they sleep, and the amount of hours that they have time with them. I think that could have been helpful in showing that, he wasn't neglectful. He was like every other parent. He was working. He was busy. His son is in school the most part of the day. I mean, on average, I think most parents get about 3 hours a day with their child. How can he be charged with knowing certain things? So, in conclusion, I think the closings were good. I think they both did a good job, and I am going to do a part 2 on my thoughts on the trial overall and what I think, the possible outcome could be. So stay tuned, because I'm opinionated as hell.